So welcome to the panel session A, dealing with the America First United States. I'm Yoshiyuki Sagara, just introduced by, and I will serve as this session's moderator. So the second Trump administration has made the America First approach explicit across a broad range of areas, including trade, security, and technology. But of course, America First and the rise of economic nationalism are not new. In 1980, Ronald Reagan used the term, "Let's make America great again," during his presidential campaign. And in 1986, Japan and the United States signed the semiconductor agreement, but the following year, in 1987, the Reagan administration determined that Japan was not complying with the agreement, and under Section 301, Japan was imposed by Ronald Reagan administration that 100% tariffs on imports of televisions, personal computers, and power tools. Even so, the Reagan administration continued to promote multilateralism through the GATT framework. And at the same time, he pursued bilateral free trade agreement, FTA, negotiation with Canada. And that eventually led to NAFTA with Mexico. So the Reagan administration's approach was to make America great by combining multilateralism, bilateralism, and plurilateralism. But Trump 2.0's America First is more ideologic, much more transactional. So the resurgence of economic nationalism and the techno-nationalism in the US is prompting allies and like-minded nations to reassess the foundation of the traditional relationship with the US and reconsider their strategic posture. So this panel will examine how nations in the Asia-Pacific and Europe engage with the America First United States. And to discuss these topics, we are very fortunate to have 4 distinguished panelists from Europe, India, and Japan. It's already introduced, but just briefly from my side, from your left, Mr. Kazuhiro Sugie is the Director for Economic Security Policy Division of METI. And Sugie-san has been leading in implementing Japanese economic security policies and promoting public-private collaboration. And the next is Dr. Hosuk Lee-Makiyama, Director of European Center for International Political Economy, ECIPE, which is the leading think tank in Brussels dedicated to global economic policies. Makiyama-san previously served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sweden with posting to Geneva and Brussels and chaired committees in the Council of the EU and WTO. Makiyama-san is particularly noted for his role in the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, EPA negotiations. And the next is Ms. Saori Tsuiki, senior economist at Mizuho Research and Technologies. Tsuiki-san specializes in macroeconomics and economic policy. Previously served for the Ministry of Finance of Japan. Recently, Tsuiki-san is known for extensive analysis on emerging markets and Japan's economic policy. And last but not least, Mr. Mihail Sharma, Director of the Observer Research Foundation, ORF. ORF is a leading think tank in India, providing policy analysis on security, economy, and global governance. Mihail's book, Restart, was shortlisted for the Financial Times Business Book of the Year. So we are very honored to have 4 distinguished panelists. So I will invite each speaker to share their views within 8 minutes for initial remarks. So to start, I'd like to invite Sugie-san to share your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sagara-san. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak at this distinguished international forum today. My name is Kazuhiro Sugie, Director for the Economic Security Policy of Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI. Let me begin with emphasizing that the Japan-United States alliance remains a cornerstone of our foreign and security policies. Our cooperative relationship with the United States has always been and will continue to be of utmost importance. This applies equally to the realm of the economic security. As a strategic partner of the United States, Japan has long contributed to the maintaining the free and open international order. However, global landscape has undergone significant changes in recent years. The stable, rule-based international order that underpinned Japan's post-war economic development is now being shaken by geopolitical shift and historical change in balance of power. Under the second Trump administration, the United States is pursuing policy aiming at expanding the domestic employment and reshoring production lines through various trade measures. At the same time, amid intense technological competition among great powers, the United States continues to strengthen export control on cutting-edge semiconductor and AI-related technologies. Yet, these are not unique to the United States. Since 2015, China has been advancing the Made in China 2025 initiative. Through extensive state support, China has been reinforcing its domestic industrial and technological base. Furthermore, since summer 2023, China has tightened export control on critical mineral and rare earths. Earlier this month, Chinese government announced the plan to introduce re-export restrictions and technological regulations relating to the rare earths through its implementation, but its implementation is reportedly postponed. But given that rare earths are essential to the wide range of industrial products, from automobiles to the electronics, these measures, if implemented, could have a profound impact on global supply chain, including Japan. Additionally, concerns are growing over the global overcapacity in emerging industries such as EVs, solar panels, and batteries. While Chinese government is attempting to address domestic overproduction through its anti-involution policies, we must closely monitor to broader implications for the global industrial foundations. Ideally, such measures would be subject to the discipline under the rule-based multilateral trading order. Unfortunately, some functions of the WTO are currently stalled, and effective solutions are lacking. In this context, countries are accelerating efforts to protect their domestic industries in order to mitigate geopolitical risks and secure economic securities. Japan is both geographically and economically located between two great powers. It is not realistic to decouple with one of them. I believe that even amid strategic rivalry between two countries, a predictable and stable United States-China relationship serves Japan's national interest. While a swift return to the rule-based international economic order may not be realistic, Japan must first strengthen its industrial technological base while also working in mid-term and long-term with like-minded countries and the global south to reinforce such economic orders. Historically, the United States has played a central role in providing a global international public goods, not only through the supply of the world key currency and support for free trade, but also in terms of global security. However, it is also true that domestic job loss in the United States hollowing out of the manufacturing and widening economic disparities have happening. At the same time, I recognize that the current America First policy in the United States reflects the voice of these American people, and I believe it is essential to engage with this reality sincerely. To remain a national capacity to independently determine its domestic and foreign policy, Japan must secure strategic autonomy. Furthermore, to keep Japan irreplaceable in international economy and reinforce the future international economic order, we need to contribute to solving the global economic and social challenges through its unique technologies and businesses. What we call it strategic indispensabilities. To achieve this, our top priority must be build a robust industrial and technological base in Japan. In 2022, Japan enacted the Economic Security Promotion Act, allocating 2.4 trillion yen for supply chain resiliency and 500 billion yen for R&D support of critical technology in economic security domain. Since May 2023, METI has convened a public-private council on how to strengthen our industrial base vis-a-vis economic security, publishing an annual action plan. The main policy framework to advance this action plan is 3 Ps and plus I, promotion, protection, partnership, and economic intelligence. It emphasizes the strengthening organic linkage between industrial promotion and defense measures in strategic sectors through public-private dialogue and international cooperation with the like-minded countries. Recognizing the economic security now encompassing the entire manufacturing sector, action plan also highlights the need to enhance value-added and supply capabilities in traditional industry, including like shipbuilding, through social in the combination of the AI deployment. On the other hand, given our limited domestic resources, we can't achieve this goal. Scale up by collaboration with the like-minded countries is key for it. The recent US-Japan trade deal included an agreement on strategic investment initiative, while past FTAs and EPAs focus on the market expansion through the reciprocal access. The growing importance of the economic securities call for the cooperation on the scale-up production capabilities among the like-minded countries. I believe this United States-Japan investment initiative will contribute to further future common industrial base corporations. Moreover, Japan must also contribute to solving the global challenges through the social deployment of our technologies globally. For this sake, the action plan also calls for the strengthening the support for overseas expansion of the key technology of Japan, such as hydrogen, ammonia, and submarine cable, that are vital for economic securities. This effort is expected to help build like-mindedness for the future reinforcement of the rule-based international economic order. In concluding, it is undeniable that Japan faces unprecedentedly geopolitical challenges situated as it is between two great powers. Nevertheless, we hear strong expectation from the other countries for Japan to continue supporting a rule-based trading system despite the geoeconomic positions. We should aim at it. We must first strengthen our domestic industrial base. At the same time, to complement the role of the United States has played in providing global international public goods long time, Japan needs keep our eyes globally and actively contribute to solving the global challenges. Together with like-minded nations, we aim to expand the circle of countries that share our value and explore a new model for international economic order that address contemporary demand or requests such as economic securities, technological innovations, resiliency, and social challenges. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Sugie-san, for sharing the latest updates and also the strategy of the Japan's economic security policy. So, Makiyama-san, please.
It's a very big topic, dealing with America first. And I'm not really sure how I would follow up, actually, to Sugie-san's excellent remarks, but I'm going to try to do my best. I'll try by saying that if you look at the reactions as well as other long-term consequences, I think you can really come down to maybe 3 principal points of reactions. Some of us have chosen to negotiate. Some have done that well. Others have not done so well. We have also considered and deployed retaliation. Some have done that very well, and some of that not very well either. And in many cases, America First have become a very nice pretext to align with a very hard mercantilist logic. And to some degree, maybe I should say that we are all doing all 3. I think there are bigger, as I said, a bigger systemic consequence of this, and I'll come back to that later. But if I just take the first box and unwind that on terms of negotiation, I think many observers have been surprised by how the deals that were deemed the best on the table, I'm thinking India and Taiwan, was actually the one that didn't succeed to pass White House once it passed through, once it left USTR. And the ones that were worst in class, which was basically Japan and Europe, were the one that was signed. That tells you something, that it's not necessarily about the quality of the agreement, but if you look from the logic of the White House, it's probably about how much left you have to give. It's also surprising, I think, that both EU and Japan agreements have an element of investment. And maybe many negotiators were reacting on some of that intelligence that were flying around early this year, that the China agreement was actually centered around investment. Now, I know there is a lot of domestic criticism, both in Europe as well as in Japan, and that's rightly so, but I will also at the same time say that investing in the United States is not a bad proposal at the moment. If you look to the fact that half of the world growth is going to be generated this year by China and the United States, and if you're going to make a very, very sane bet that China is not going to open up, there's only one market left. Europe accounts aggregated for less than 2% of the global growth this year. It's the same size of Indonesia. You're going to need a lot of agreements with Europe in order to basically recapture the same kind of market potential you have in the US or China. So in other words, with the Forex and the growth potential, it's not a bad proposal in itself. Then you can maybe argue that would have happened anyway. Now, then we have retaliation. I think we had a missed opportunity in maybe making a joint position among the close allies of the United States to present a joint retaliation, or I don't even want to call it retaliation, cost of consequences presented to the United States, if you like. Now, that's very, very hard to do. First of all, if you, in the same way that you can outspend China, you cannot outcoerce United States. That's not possible. Second, if you have a broader spectrum of interest than the United States, you will always going to lose because United States is going to have the last word. Security dependencies is just one of the factors. In other words, I think there was a moment, but basically, due to prisoner's dilemma and other elements, we cannot agree. I mean, let's face it, if Europe would sign an agreement with the United States, would they wait and hold off until Vietnam has an agreement with the United States too, to let off its retaliation? That's a very, very hard proposition to sell to any country. And also, there's a package of items, for example, like the anti-coercion instrument in Europe. There's a number of digital legislation that's been presented, not just by Europe, but also other countries. And I'm not sure that proposition works. I don't think everyone has gamed it out. As I said, there is a question about interest, spectrum of interest, whether you actually get the last words or not. And this explains basically why China, surprisingly, has shown remarkable restraint when retaliating against the United States, because they have gamed it out. And I think that's a very, very big difference in how people have reacted around the world. That restraint perhaps describes what China is doing now. And I think it's a more question about alignment with the United States, i.e. China first, and hard mercantilist logic. And for China, tariffs and market restrictions absolutely make sense. As I said, they are the only one economy that is growing together with the United States right now. And to be able to reserve that for their own company, that makes total sense. And if you look at their exposure to US companies, people will be surprised to hear that actually for Chinese-owned firms, exports to the United States only account for 2% of corporate revenues. You can survive that. That's not a problem. Employment is a completely different answer, but in other words, it gives you a pretext to do a lot of bad things that you were planning to do anyway. Some of the pretexts are not necessarily bad. We are all dealing with overcapacities and dysfunctionalities of the steel market. Europe has gone to introduce TRQs in steel. That's out of necessity. In other words, what we are trying to do in terms of steel and aluminum is not that far off from what the United States is doing. The only difference is table manners, and table manners actually matter. That brings me to the long-term question that I was asking myself. What are the bigger system impacts of this? Now, I think we have a rush towards FTAs, and that's very, very encouraging. And it's also to legalize a relationship. If you had the sort of like a friends of benefits situation, now is a very good time to put some of the stuff into a prenup. But also, it shows how ineffective they are. I can think of a couple of countries that definitely were overpaid for their FTAs, and especially with the United States. It didn't protect Korea. I'll just say this as a joke, but it sucks to be a Korean trade minister at any period of time, including now. They were the one that took a deal on steel with the previous Trump administration, and Chorus didn't protect them, actually, against these tariffs, and you basically have to overpay. Now, I think there is a lot of ideas around locking in European-Asian relationship. I'm endlessly grateful for not being on the TPP panel, because I have my own views on that. But what we need to figure out is also goes beyond tariffs, because if you look at these pretexts, they're done on the basis of national security or sustainability or other issues that are actually exempt from trade agreements. There's a GATT Article 21 or GATT Article 20, which is basically copied into most of our FTAs, and which basically means that an FTA will not help you against Indonesia first, or China first, or Europe first. That brings to a whole new fora of agreements on critical raw materials and export controls that needs to be done. And that is actually happening. And we heard a lot of good ideas coming from METI just now. But the problem, I think, is the more fundamental one around the global framework. And we heard about the WTO. And I kind of reach for my revolver whenever I heard about WTO reform. We need to be very, very clear about one thing. The multilateral system, the rule-based system that people talk about, is basically financed by one entity. It's the US trade deficit. It's 1.7 trillion, and that fuels basically all of global export-led economies, directly or indirectly. Now we have a choice. Either Europe and China or someone, maybe Japan, steps up and open up their markets to the value of 1.7 trillion. I don't see that happening. I don't see that leadership, at least not that willingness to take the responsibility. That's too much of a commitment. It may be even collectively. And I would even say that some of the countries I mentioned don't have that disposition for paying for the benefit of others. Now, that basically means the system has broken down. And I don't think now is the time for reform, because that's too late. Reform is about substance and commitment. We have a problem in structure i.e. there's no problem with GATT, or there's no problem with GATT. The problem is in the Marrakesh Agreement and who's inside it. Now, that's a whole different topic that I will basically stop here, but these are the fundamental reactions that we're seeing now, and this is not a short term. This is a long-term adjustment of an equilibrium that has not worked for many, many decades in the trading system. We can basically adapt and say that we are also going to do our own take on America First, which is not necessarily the same tariff-based policy, but we have to look to our interest. Or we can go to the least efficient means of policy tools in trade negotiation, which is whining. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Makiyama-san, for very sharp, insightful comments on the impacts of trade negotiations and also the future of trade system. I'd like to ask more on the future of the current trade system later. So the next is Tsuki-san.
Okay, thank you. So I'm very pleased to be here to have a discussion with Mr. Sugie-san and Dr. Makiyama-san and Mr. Sharma. So it's very difficult for me personally to think about the Japanese economic strategy in era of American First, because the part of my family, so we're born in America, so Japan is also my country too. So it's very, very difficult question for me, but for your insight, I try to explain the several concepts. So in the current global landscape where the American First continue to shape with American economic and foreign policy, Japan must rethink its strategic positioning. This environment demands the more resilient approach to international engagement. From my perspective, Japan's economic strategy should focus on two pillars. The first, Japan must build diversified and multipolar network of international relationships. As global power dynamics shift, relying too heavily on one single partner, no matter how close, poses numerous risks. The Japan should strengthen ties not only with the traditional allies, but also with the emerging economic and regional partners, with creating more balanced and flexible diplomatic and economic network. Second, Japan needs to enhance its economic security and resilience to maintain and elevate its presence in the international community. This includes the securing supply chains and investment in strategic industries such as semiconductor, energy, and the advanced technologies. Economic strength is not just about growth, it's about the ability to withstand external shocks and assert national interest in the competitive global area. Okay, let me explain the detail about the concept of the multipolar network. The slide shows the image of the medium-term strategies for the middle polar cooperation and supply chain restructuring. There are 4 points. The first, multipolar global environment and the relationship with the United States. With adapting to multipolar world shaped by U.S. isolationism and the prolonged U.S.-China tensions, the Japan have to reinforce its bilateral relationship with the United States. I strongly believe the new Takaichi administration tried to strengthen the relationship with the United States. The second, strengthening the middle power alliance. As global power dynamics shift, as I said, the relying on the single partner poses the high risk. The cooperation with the middle power like UK, EU, South Korea, Taiwan, ASEAN, Mexico, and Canada to avoid protectionism will be key. The third, restructuring ASEAN supply chains. The Japanese company had invested for a long time in Asia. So to counter deflationary pressure from Chinese exports, which currently occurred by the US high tariff, Japan have to restructure its supply chain, especially in the Asian area. The last one, strategic, so pivot to the global south. The Asian economies and emerging economies like India has similar challenging circumstance now, like the pressure from the Chinese imports. So Japan have to focus, rebuild region supply chain, and invest in the global south, such as India or the other emerging economies, to reduce the dependency on China. The next, so I'd like to explain a little bit about for economic security issues. Based on the trade data, so the Japan export competitiveness is raising in technology incentive, high value added, intermediate goods. The key area includes the machinery or electric components. Also gaining the share of processed materials also. Then economic security covering various industries is pretty difficult to decide what industry Japan should invest in. Based on strategic, the indispensability, how to maximize Japanese competitiveness among global is another key. So because of that, we have to consider how to select carefully to leverage Japanese competitiveness among the global community when considering industry policy. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsuki-san, for sharing a lot of hints to Japan's growth and also how Japan can, I would say, survive in this very difficult era, and also outlining some strategies, including middle power cooperation and also strategic pivot to global south. It's a fantastic idea. So as Tsuki-san mentioned, for Japan, India is the strategic, naturally geostrategic, geopolitical, and geoeconomic partner. So I'd like to hear from Indian perspective from Michiel, please.
Hello. Thank you, Sage-san, and thanks to everyone here at the Institute, to Suzuki-san, to Ken-san for putting this together. I can't say I represent anyone's opinion other than myself, but I will try to represent Indian conventional wisdom, Indian public ideas about how to deal with America right now. And we are, of course, as many people might know, in a very special position. In India, we have been subjected to the highest tariff rates in the world at 50%, alongside Brazil. But Brazil is willing, President Lula is willing to go to Kuala Lumpur and talk to President Trump and get those lowered. Our Prime Minister is not. And the reason that we are in this special position is because we don't care. We don't need the US market. We don't need US companies. And we don't need US manufacturing. We don't need the US as a security partner. Or at least these are the things that we believe. Our security is not guaranteed by the US, and our prosperity is not guaranteed by the US, so we don't care. What does that actually mean for how we think about these issues? Well, Partly, I'm going to try and quickly answer 3 or maybe 2 questions that we asked ourselves in India and try and give you our answers. First, how long will we have to deal with America first? Second, who is most vulnerable to America first? And third, how is it that therefore, in the age of America first, we should think about our partnerships and our policies? First, how long do we have to deal with America first? For a very long time. Definitely longer than Trump will be around. We cannot assume that America first will end when Trump goes or when the Republicans lose office, because we already saw that Biden did absolutely nothing to reverse the damage that Trump did in his first term. He didn't fix the WTO. He didn't make any other changes to Trump's China tariffs. So one cannot expect that the Democrats will come in and make any changes after Trump goes. Frankly, there may well be a political intuition that both parties in the US now share, which is that economic policy should be an instrument of domestic politics, of domestic patronage, and a change of government is not going to imply any reversal of that. And also, America First may have begun as a political slogan, but once these slogans become real, they become policy instruments, they become the practice of bureaucrats, they have their own momentum. We heard Wendy Cutler earlier saying the US-Malaysia agreement was good. It included an economic security element to the whole America First thing. That's actually bad news. That's bad news because it means that our notion of economic security that we worked on for a while is being cannibalized by America First. We heard, we just heard from, I think, Dr. Lee-Makiyama said that USTR is beginning to develop an understanding of what America First actually wants. That's a bad idea. Once it gets into the bureaucrats' heads, it means America First lives forever, because bureaucracies live forever. And finally, of course, the longer you have an America First type system that is basically disguised mercantilism, an excuse for protectionism, the stronger the domestic constituencies will be that form around it. Right? Every year that tariffs are up or subsidies are given means more firms, more workers, more regions in the US become dependent upon them, will vote around them, that they will become the status quo, that will become how things have always done. You cannot roll it back. So that's just the nature of protectionist policy. We have to deal with it. And so therefore, America First is going to be with us for a while. Now, who's vulnerable to America First? Well, the closer you are to the US, the more vulnerable you are. Long-standing privileged ties with the US will not protect you from America First. It means you are in bigger trouble from America First. And partly that's because of how politicians like Trump and populists like him react. They want to show that they have made a big change. If you want to show you have made a big change, if you want to show your voters that you've made a giant shift in policy, it's simplest to focus on depriving those who have benefited most from previous integration. It is simplest to take away privileges from countries, from firms, from sectors that have done well in the past, or that have been most aligned with the US in the past. That shows a big shift. This is how populists work. Furthermore, the more embedded you are in the US, the more privileges you've got. That means the more levers there are for him to bargain on, the more things there are for him to take away. For a man like that, for leaders like that, they look, what are the things that I can use? If you have 8 things that you can use against one partner and 2 things you can use against somebody else, it doesn't matter which is the priority for your action. A person that like that says, I have 8 levers to use, I'll use all 8 against this person first. It makes me look like a bigger, stronger person than using 2. And we in India are very familiar with this because we have received a lot of unilateral advantages from the US over the past 25 years. And slowly Trump has chipped away over the past 6 to 8 months at all of them. And some of us are quite shocked at how many things he had to use. And there's quite a long distance still to go. right? But as I said, it doesn't really matter to us because we never benefited as such from any of those unilateral benefits we got from the US. What's the practical consequence, I think, for a lot of us of this kind of behavior? Well, we have to hedge our exposure, we have to prepare to recalibrate, but above all, we should avoid being a visible target, right? Don't retaliate. We got the highest tariffs in the world, 50% in India. We've done nothing for 6 to 8 months. Don't retaliate. Don't become a visible target. As a company, as a sector, or as a nation, don't get on the president's desk. Stay off the president's desk. Do not appear to benefit too much from an existing or a new US relationship. Don't say, it's a great deal we've got. Never say it's a great deal. Say it's a terrible deal we've got. We are suffering like anything. That we've suffered in our relationship with the US for the past 10 years. Now you want to take even the little thing that we've got away. That's something Trump will understand. Do not say the US is a valuable partner, a valued partner. Say the US brings nothing to me. That is how you deal with a situation like this. And do not fight America first by taking any special favors from Trump, because he will enjoy taking them away from you next year, as the Koreans have found, or in his next term, because he's going to have another term. So never create uniqueness, never become a visible target. And that brings me to my final point. How do we deal with the future? What are the new relationships we create? We heard a lot earlier about the rules-based order. In India, we know that the rules-based order is dead. We are happy that the rule-based order is dead. We are glad it's dead. We never believed in it. Why? And we don't believe Trump for killing the rules-based order. We think Biden, as I said, given the failure to fix the WTO, is equally culpable. We view the European Union as culpable for killing the rules-based order, for creating what we discussed earlier, the Brussels effect. When you start introducing regulations and conditioning access into your markets on regulations that you have created for your own benefits, where are trade rules in that? When you bring environment or labor into trade discussions, if you bring national security, Article 20, Article 21, what is the point of having a rules-based order? And finally, we blame China, because China said that it would enter the rules-based order by following the rules and then spent 20 years breaking it. So we are quite happy that the rules-based order is dead. What we want is predictability. How can we recover predictability without the rules of a rules-based order? How does one deal? How does one find predictability in a world with risk? How does any investor do it? How does any investor do it? You search for hedging. You search for a portfolio. And therefore, as we just heard from Sugie-san, you find multiple partners. You find multiple ways, people who might turn against you, but it doesn't matter, because there are other partners that you will have. Right? That is exactly what portfolio investment is, and international relations, international investment is now just portfolio investment. I think that part of what we also have begun to only slightly understand in India is that uniqueness makes you a target. So the other thing that you have to hedge is processes, products, investments. Invest in multiple locations, have multiple different processes, have multiple different supply chains, have multiple different partners and investors. Any form of uniqueness, whether you're the Netherlands in, occupying a unique place in the semiconductor supply chain, or Taiwan, any kind of unique relationship with the US, all of these things are a leverage for somebody to use against you. Be useful to multiple people in multiple different ways, then you will have multiple friends, and somebody will defend you when you're down. I think that's basically it, but the last thought that I leave you with is that if we're going to be responsive to this, we have to be a little smarter, we have to be a little better coordinated. We worry about Chinese steel and overcapacity, we worry about solar, and in order to combat that, we put restrictions on each other. We are pushed by America, and we diversify our investment by sending it into America when we should be sending it into each other. Right? There is no coordinated response. We're all fighting with each other to give Trump the best deal. The money that we should be spending on each other to create resilient supply chains, we're instead pretending or lying that we'll put into America, saying that we'll put billions there when we know it's not going to amount to anything. This is not a productive long-term way to approach the America First problem. The only way to approach it genuinely is by presenting a common set of threads to him and by having a common idea of how we're getting out of it.
Thank you, Mihail, for fantastic observations from Indian side. So IOG invite Mihail periodically, almost every year. So it's great to hear his unique views on rules-based order. And it's quite fascinating to hear that view in Tokyo. And so I think the question is that how we can secure predictability without rules-based order, but I'll ask that later. Okay. Yeah. So I'll ask a question to each panelist from Sugie-san following the presentation. So Prime Minister Takaichi just concluded the summit with President Trump. And during the tariff negotiations, Japan and United States agreed the investment initiative for $550 billion. So I do believe that there were some discussions within the summit, but I'm just curious about the overview and also the current status of how much have those initiatives progressed, including promoting critical areas like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, steel, shipbuilding, etc. So yeah, please.
As I mentioned in the opening presentations, it's difficult for Japan alone to maintain a full set of the industrial base. So therefore, cooperation with the like-minded countries, including the United States, is essential. So the key to such cooperation lies in how we can scale up our capabilities. While I would like to prefer not to comment on the individual project, the Japan-United States Investment Initiative is an effort to build a supply chain in the United States for sectors, which is critical to the economic security for both United States and Japan. So this will involve the strategic and legal discussion on various proposals, utilizing the governmental financing and loan guaranteeing from the governmental agencies such as NEXI and JBIC. The sector highlighted in the agreement, semiconductor, pharmaceutical, steel, shipbuilding, etc., maybe AI, quantum. These are all strategic areas for future economic security for Japan. So based on this initiative, we pursue further alignment of our policies and strengthen our industrial base.
Thank you. I think two leaders committed to strengthen the cooperation. To do so, of course, Japanese government need to finance them. So my next question goes to Tsuiki-san. And so as Prime Minister Takaichi mentioned, she will be focusing on strengthening crisis management financing, including economic security, energy security, and food security. And also, she mentioned that Japanese government will achieve the 2% of GDP on defense spending within this year. Which much earlier than planned. So my question to Tsuiki-san is, what's the fiscal policy to support those, and someone says that it's kind of the high pressure economy, but is that sustainable? I think those are quite natural questions for me. So what's your views on that?
Okay, thank you. So I think so that we have to overview the structure of the new administration. So I think the thinking of the financial sustainability. So the one notable development under the Takaichi administration is a correlation with the Japan Innovation Party, Ishin no Kai in Japanese. that this partnership has brought the social security reform to the forefront of the policy agenda. So as you know, Japan is suffering from the high debt ratio per GDP, so for a long time, and so it seems unsustainable now. But we have to think of the social security reform. Then this is an area that had been long, politically sensitive and difficult to advance. This shift is significant because it introduced new balance between the growth-oriented expansionary fiscal policy and structural reform. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so we have issues on economic security, food security, energy security, and the social security. So which is maybe the biggest issue for Japanese government. But let's see how it goes for financing. But as such, Japan is trying to make deals with the United States because U.S. is our security partner alliance. But my next question goes to Makiyama-san. I think lessons from trade negotiation is that the Tokyo round, Uruguay round, basically the Western democracies are trying to lower tariffs and to open up markets. But the multilateralism faced challenges in 1980s, also 1990s. And the consequences was that to promote bilateral negotiation like NAFTA, and also promote plurilateral negotiation. That's what Japan is promoting, i.e. CPTPP. But as you mentioned, you said even FTA is ineffective. So you stress the ineffectiveness of FTA. So, but how should we, deal with these challenges? Because what should we do to update FTA or operationalize FTA, or how should we do on trade deals and trade agreements?
That's a very good question, and it's also a very common misconception, I think, that trade agreements are supposed to fix everything. They're not. They're supposed to fix trade problems. And once your counterpart said, this is not a trade problem, this is my economic sovereignty, this is about my welfare of my people, this is about my food security to feed my poor, you're dead. Basically, that's no longer an effective argument. That's where I'm saying that I am really encouraging the non-trade partnership agreement that has been conducted by METI and the Japanese government. That's the right way to go. We collect commitments where we can go further than the trade agreements. This is what you could say economic agreements that live in the shadow of the trade exceptions. And that's basically necessary. You can drive a truck through the exceptions in the TPP, which covers all legitimate public policy objectives. This is the reason why China has looked at the agreement and said, we can sign on to this. Every one of their objectives are legitimate public policy objectives. Now, this is a bluff that I think MOFCOM has basically understood, and they are posing that against us and saying, okay, let's see what we can do with it. And your chronology of trade agreements or the big trade rounds in the WTO is actually quite good reminder that we actually did have trade conflicts before the China's entry into the WTO system. But the China's entry into the system posed us into a very, very sharp choice. There's a fork in the road. One, I think, which is very often not understood is the South-South relationship, not just with India, but also with ASEAN. It's one thing to cope with Japan entering into the trading system in the 50s, or even Korea, or the ASEAN Tigers. That's something you can deal with. But if you have 1.4 billion people with $10,000 GDP per capita, probably going to double in a very short period of time, you are basically accepting the fact that no one else will be able to go through industrialization and export-led growth. You can't, Korea could deal with Japan's existence in the trading system. Indonesia and the others who want to actually go into export-led growth would have to find another wave, because whether China wants it or not, it's too big. It's going to block that Asia model of industrial growth for a foreseeable future. Now, that's the reason why I'm saying that the China's entry into the system is going to create a major fork in the road that we have to deal with. Now, there is an orthodoxy in some capitals saying that, well, we should kick China out. I see some merit in that argument, but to kick them out of what? In the end, if you see WTO as an enforceable contract that you put on people you can't have trade agreements with, you should keep China in. And in all accounts, United States, even under America First, can cause less damage to your economy than China could outside the WTO. I'm glad you mentioned plurilateral. And what most Japanese don't know is the father of plurilateralism is a Japanese trade negotiator called Nakatomi-san. And he's actually something of my mentor. And I owe him for almost everything I know about trade agreement. And that's one way to go, but that's not necessarily mean that it needs to be a part of the WTO structure. Here's where I say once again, do not confuse reform, which is an euphemism for incrementalism. It's not the commitment that's the problem. It's actually the structure. It's the Marrakesh Agreement. We have to find a different way. If you're going to have a plurilateralism, you have to kill Marrakesh Article 2, which is the single undertaking. There must be a way to be a part of the system without being a member of the system as a whole. TPP is a very, very interesting approach. And I think also Kei Danren has put a very interesting concept note on the table regarding how to take plurilateralism and increasing the level of commitment. And I think there's fantastic work being done in the area. But once again, it doesn't solve the problem of the structure and also incentive to compliance. There is no one who will comply with any rules as long as there is export-led growth on the table. We are now living in an inflationary regime. Every market access comes at a very, very high price. You will not see any compliance with the WTO or even a plurilateral system unless you put real benefits on the table. We have forgotten about the fact that we are being so obsessed with rules. No one follows rules unless there is a benefit to those rules. We have forgotten the fact that the United States actually bankrolled the system with a trade deficit. That's what I tried to say. Thank you.
Thank you for the fantastic observations on trade negotiations. So anyway, we should China in. We cannot live without China. But I think India may have different views on that. So my question to Mihail is that what's the Indian stance or posture towards China? Because even I'm also asked by Indian companies that what's the Indian government's policy towards China. So I'm just curious about your views on that.
Well, I think that we have to remember that India took a very hard stand on Chinese investment, on Chinese control of their supply chain, well before anybody else did. And from about 2014, 2015, we refused to host any Belt and Road investment. We didn't send anybody to the various summits. There's always been a large amount of doubt as to what strings are attached to Chinese investment. And part of that is obviously the fact that we have an ongoing political issue. But part of that was the distrust that we had building already in the Indian economic policy community about the kind of economy that China was. We did not think it was a private market economy with which you could have dealings that were mutually beneficial. It was a kind of economy that should not have been in the WTO, and that we should not be forced to have investment and most favored nation rules trading with. And fundamentally, therefore, we did not, if we could allow investment from any other company, from any other country, saying this is profit-seeking investment that will come into our country and search for profits and thereby reveal efficiencies in our economy, which is the purpose of foreign investment. We did not think that was true of Chinese investment. We did not think that was true of Chinese companies. We did not welcome them at all. Now, we are now in a position where it turns out the US is also a dangerous non-market economy where the government can take 15% stakes in leading companies just by threatening the ethnicity of the managing director of that company, right? So therefore, we cannot entirely trust US investment either. So we are now in the position where we are forced to view multiple large economies as weaponizing their relationships with us, which means that we have to treat them, we can either stop dealing with them all, which is a large stream of isolationist thought in India, or we can just say we have to treat them like they are treating us. So in general, we are in the position where we are adjusting, but we're not over-adjusting. We are reopening slowly to Chinese investment, to Chinese companies, but we are not welcoming them in like we are welcoming European companies, or welcoming them in cautiously, like we would any American investment if it ever materialized. We have different levels and layers of acceptance, expectation, barriers, depending upon how disinterested and purely economic we think that investment actually is. So we have to be a little bit careful about how we think about this. And just to be clear, what we would urge anybody else against is any equivalence in this age when everyone is using national security, any equivalence between the US and China, because that's tempting. It's tempting to say they are both using, security, they're both weaponizing their economic connections with us. Yes, but only one is likely to invade us, right? Unless you're Canada, I suppose. But only one is likely to invade us, right? So let's not over-adjust. And second, we need to keep the US focused on the China threat as well, right? America first is a problem, but it'll be a giant problem for the rest of us if instead the US begins to say America first, China second. Right? Even that much is too much for us to accept because it means, for example, that India and ASEAN will never ever get rich, as we just heard, and that's true. So we cannot have America first, but we really cannot have America first, China second as a consensus. And let us be clear, with the US, we want more integration, and it is being denied to us. With China, we are concerned about the level of integration we already have. These are two different situations. Obviously, they will have two different solutions when it comes to our economic security. China was the original disruptor. The US is only disrupting us now. China began disrupting us all 25 years ago. We wasted 15 years discussing other things, fighting with each other, when we should have been focusing on that instead. In some sense, dealing with the America First United States, we shouldn't be dealing with the US in the America First era. We should still be, that title should still be dealing with China in the America First era, because that remains the fundamental disruptor, that remains the source of the imbalances. The reason the US has that deficit of 1.7 trillion is because none of us can sell into China, which should be buying our products.
Thank you so much for very fascinating and also insightful and stimulating discussions. Previously, during Cold War, reciprocity was the term for lowering tariffs among countries. So there were Uruguay round, Tokyo round, but now the USTR rep in Trump administration is saying Now, this is the Trump round. So it's the new reciprocity that we are facing. So it's quite a transactional world order, very challenging time. But I do hope that everyone can get some insight and also to see some hopes from today's discussion. So I thank you, all panelists. Thanks.